Late 1950s Munich. BMW was fading, building scooters and microcars while its rivals sold real automobiles. Then, Baron Alex von Falkenhausen sketched a simple four-cylinder that could grow with the company's dreams. No luxury budget, no grand factory plan, just raw engineering discipline. What began as a modest 1.5-liter project would power sedans, sports cars, and even a Formula One world champion. From bankruptcy's edge to global glory, this is the story of the BMW M10, the unassuming engine that rebuilt an empire. Origins of a lifeline. In 1957, BMW was nearly finished. Its pre-war prestige had vanished. Its luxury models sold in handfuls, and its factories survived only by building tiny Isetta bubble cars under license. Across Germany, Mercedes-Benz prospered. BMW, once a proud maker of aircraft engines and elegant tourers, seemed destined for the history books. Inside the company, the debate was existential. Some executives wanted to sell to Daimler. Others argued for one last gamble, a true BMW built for the new middle class of post-war Europe. That meant a car both affordable and advanced, with a light chassis and an engine that a crossflow layout that promised strength without excess weight. In its first 1.5-liter form, the bore and stroke measured 82 by 71 millimeters, while later, 2-liter versions expanded to 89 by 80 millimeters. This nearly square geometry gave the engine balance, smoothness, and room to grow. Even in prototype form, the engine ran with the precision of a watch. Von Falkenhausen's approach was not to chase horsepower, but to design permanence. Every bolt and bearing was placed as though the engine would live forever. He wasn't building an experiment. He was building BMW's second chance. The company didn't know it yet, but this quiet four-cylinder would not just power cars. It would power a resurrection. The M10 was not born from extravagance. It was shaped by necessity and guided by the kind of restraint that defines great engineering. Every part of it reflected a lesson learned from BMW's mistakes in the years before. The company could no longer afford overcomplicated luxury engines. What it needed was a workhorse built with surgical precision and balanced efficiency and spirit. The job of designing that engine fell to Baron Alex von Falkenhausen, a racer and engineer who had survived the war with both skill and stubbornness. He had already built racing motors for BMW before 1939, and his reputation for precision earned him one more chance to save the brand. His directive was simple: create a small four-cylinder that could last a decade, meet global regulations, and serve as the base for everything BMW might build next. At first, von Falkenhausen proposed a 1.3-liter design, compact and modest, but he was thinking ahead. He knew European cars were getting heavier, and drivers wanted more speed. So he widened the block, stretched the stroke, and future-proofed the design to handle up to 2 liters. That flexibility would prove critical. The result was the M10, a cast-iron block with an aluminum head, a 5-bearing crankshaft, and the flexibility to grow. The foundation was its cast-iron block, strong enough to handle future power increases, but compact enough to fit into small family sedans. Above it sat an aluminum alloy cylinder head that cut weight and improved cooling. Together, they gave the engine a perfect balance between strength and heat management, something most of its competitors struggled to achieve. At its heart was a forged steel crankshaft, supported by 5 main bearings. That level of reinforcement was more than a small four-cylinder required, but von Falkenhausen had insisted on it. He designed it to spin freely at high revolutions without vibration or wear, anticipating that one day racers would demand much more from it than the average driver ever would. The oiling system, too, was built with long life in mind, feeding every bearing and cam lobe through deep internal channels instead of relying on simple splash lubrication. The single overhead camshaft operated 2 valves per cylinder. It was a simple system, but what made it special was its efficiency. The valves were arranged in a crossflow layout, meaning air entered on one side of the head and exited on the other. The design improved breathing and combustion consistency. giving the M10 a smooth and willing nature even at high RPM. BMW engineers often said the M10 was overbuilt by accident. The block could handle far more pressure than its first carbureted versions would ever create. Early engines used a single Solex carburetor, producing between 70 and 80 horsepower. But there was always more waiting to be unlocked. The combustion chambers were compact and well-shaped, the pistons light, and the crank geometry ideal for efficiency. It was that hidden potential that made the M10 remarkable. Unlike most engines, which begin to struggle when modified, the M10 seemed to welcome it. It could be tuned, enlarged, or even turbocharged without losing its reliability. That adaptability came not from luck, but from design foresight. Von Falkenhausen had given BMW something far greater than a product. He had given it a platform. When the first prototypes ran on BMW's dyno benches, engineers noticed something impressive. Even after hours of high-load testing, the engines maintained consistent performance with very little wear. The oil stayed clean, the bearings remained smooth, and the tolerances stayed within spec. What they had created was not a temporary solution to BMW's financial problems, but a timeless piece of machinery. It was precise, durable, and endlessly modifiable. The M10 was ready. All it needed now was a car worthy of carrying it. Before we move forward, if you appreciate stories that trace engineering back to its origins and the people who built it, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps give these forgotten machines the place in history they deserve. Now, let's move on to the Neue Klasse Rebirth. When the first production M10 was bolted into the BMW 1500 in 1962, it marked more than the debut of a new engine. It was the rebirth of a company that had nearly disappeared. The car itself was called the New Class, and it represented everything BMW had learned from its struggles. It was compact, elegant, and engineered with a precision that set it apart from its competitors. The M10 gave it life. Producing around 80 horsepower, the 1500 was not the most powerful car in its segment, but it was something far rarer. It was balanced. The smoothness of the engine, its linear torque, and its willingness to rev made the entire car feel alive in a way no rival could match. For the first time since the war, journalists described a BMW not as outdated or indulgent, but as modern. The Neue Klasse was the car that finally made sense of the M10's design philosophy. The engine's light weight allowed the car to handle beautifully, its durability made it practical for everyday use, and its tunability meant that new versions could be created without redesigning the entire vehicle. Over the next few years, the 1500 evolved into the 1600, 1800, and 2000, each step offering more power and refinement, but sharing the same core. It was the engine's flexibility that gave BMW a real identity. The same block could be fitted with different carburetors, different compression ratios, and even different camshaft profiles to suit everything from family sedans to sporting coupes. In an era when most car makers built an engine for a single purpose, BMW had built one that could serve many. Von Falkenhausen had insisted that every new model be built on the same mechanical foundation. It kept production costs down, but it also gave BMW something more important: a consistent driving feel. Whether you bought a 1500 or a 2000 Ti, the character was unmistakable. The throttle response, the smooth climb of the revs, the sound of the engine settling into its rhythm, it all felt connected. By the mid-1960s, the Neue Klasse had become a symbol of Germany's industrial comeback, and the M10 was its heartbeat. It was not exotic, yet it inspired confidence in everyone who drove it. For a company that had been moments away from extinction, that confidence mattered more than anything. Within a few short years, BMW went from financial uncertainty to international recognition. The M10 was now more than a technical success. It was a cultural one. It proved that performance and practicality could coexist, that an engineering discipline could produce emotion, and that a small four-cylinder could carry the pride of an entire nation. Growing pains and evolution. The M10 had proven itself as a savior, but BMW was not a company that stood still for long. the success of the Neue Klasse sedans created something new, a hunger for more performance. Drivers loved the smoothness and dependability of the four-cylinder, yet they wanted more speed and more power. The engineers in Munich were already ready to deliver. By 1966, the engine began to evolve. Its displacement was increased first to 1.8 liters and then to a full 2.0. The larger versions transformed BMW's personality from sensible and precise to something far more spirited. The 2.0-liter M10 produced as much as 120 horsepower in sport-tuned trims. It was still smooth and refined, but now it pushed the small BMW sedans into territory that challenged sports cars. The brand that had once been known for practicality suddenly carried the scent of performance. That power came with its share of complications. The carburetors that fed the early engines could be difficult to tune. Ambient temperature, altitude, and even humidity changed how they behaved. A perfectly balanced setup in Munich might run lean in Madrid or rich in Zurich. Mechanics spent long hours adjusting jets and synchronizing throttle plates to keep the M10 happy. Timing chains stretched as the miles climbed, producing a gentle metallic rattle that became a familiar sound to longtime owners. Still, the engine's reputation for toughness never faltered. It would tolerate neglect that destroyed other motors. It could run on low-quality fuel, survive missed oil changes, and keep turning long after its gaskets began to seep. What mattered most was that the M10 never lost its eagerness. Even after a decade of development, it remained light on its feet, quick to rev, and almost impossible to kill. BMW's engineers refined it rather than replacing it. They improved cooling passages, adjusted valve timing, and increased compression ratios. The goal was always progress through iteration, never a clean break. The company's engineers referred to this as building trust into metal. Each small revision made the engine quieter, cleaner, and smoother without losing the sharp mechanical personality that drivers loved. By the end of the 1960s, the M10 was not just an engine but a benchmark. It powered sedans, coupes, and even experimental racing prototypes. It had become the single thread that connected every BMW model together. Its story was only beginning, and its next chapter would turn the company from a survivor into a global symbol of performance. The arrival of the BMW 2002 changed everything. When it appeared in 1968, it did more than introduce another variant of the Neue Klasse. It gave the M10 the stage it had always deserved. The car was small, sharp, and purposeful, and the engine underneath its hood was finally allowed to show what it could really do. In the standard 2002, the 2-liter M10 produced about 100 horsepower, enough to make the lightweight coupe feel alive in a way few cars of the time could match. But BMW quickly realized that it could push the engine further. The company began experimenting with dual carburetor setups and more aggressive camshafts, creating the 2002 Ti and later the 2002 Ti. These versions delivered up to 130 horsepower and turned the car into a genuine driver's machine. The secret weapon was fuel injection. Instead of relying on carburetors, the 2002 T used a mechanical Kugelfischer system that precisely metered fuel at high pressure. The result was instant throttle response and a clean surge of power through the entire rev range. Drivers described it as mechanical honesty, an engine that responded directly to your right foot without hesitation or delay. The 2002 quickly became a legend among enthusiasts. It was fast enough to embarrass cars with twice the cylinders and refined enough to drive every day. The M10 was the reason why. Its balance and strength allowed the car to remain composed at the limit. The sound it made at high RPM was crisp and metallic, like a precision instrument being played to its breaking point. Then came 1973 and the boldest step of all, the 2002 Turbo. Europe had never seen anything like it. BMW took the humble M10 block and fitted a KKK turbocharger, stronger pistons, and a specially calibrated fuel injection system. The result was 170 horsepower and a power band that hit like a wave. For a moment, nothing in its class could touch it. It was a brilliant idea delivered at the worst possible time. The oil crisis arrived that same year, and turbocharged engines were suddenly seen as reckless. BMW built only 1,672 examples before production stopped. Yet the 2002 Turbo proved something remarkable. The M10, born as an economy engine, could handle forced induction without losing reliability. Its overbuilt bottom end and efficient head design made it a natural platform for high performance. Racers took notice. In touring car championships across Europe, BMW teams began modifying M10 engines for competition. Some ran dual-side draft carburetors, others used experimental fuel injection. Outputs climbed beyond 200 horsepower without sacrificing durability. The same characteristics that made the M10 civil on the road made it unstoppable on the track. The transformation was complete. What had begun as a simple four-cylinder for family sedans had become the heart of a performance dynasty. The M10 was no longer just BMW's engine. It was its identity. By the late 1970s, the M10 had already proven itself on the road and in touring car racing, but its story was still far from finished. Deep inside BMW Motorsport, a group of engineers led by Paul Roche began pushing the engine far beyond anything its creator had imagined. Their goal was simple but audacious: to turn the same four-cylinder engine that powered sedans into a Formula One winner. The transformation began with Formula 2. BMW's racing division developed a heavily modified version of the M10 known as the M12. It retained the basic block, crank, and overall geometry, but every other part was reimagined for competition. The M12's twin cam head allowed the engine to breathe freely at 10,000 revolutions per minute, and its precision fueling made it both powerful and reliable. The results were immediate. BMW dominated the Formula 2 series throughout the 1970s, proving that the M10's fundamental structure could handle the strain of professional racing. Success in Formula 2 led to an even bolder experiment. With turbocharging now revolutionizing motorsport, BMW saw a chance to enter Formula 1 with an engine that was both compact and incredibly strong. Roche and his team took the M10 block once again and redesigned it for the extreme pressures of forced induction. The result was the M12/13, a 1.5-liter turbocharged monster that would soon make history. The engineers were fearless in their approach. They used ordinary production blocks as the base, sometimes ones that had already seen thousands of miles on the road. Each block was X-rayed for imperfections and then fitted with bespoke internals capable of handling extreme boost levels. In race specification, the M12/13 produced about 850 horsepower, while qualifying versions reached as high as 1,300 according to period reports. Those numbers were almost unthinkable for a four-cylinder engine. In 1983, Nelson Piquet drove the Brabham BMW BT52 to the Formula One World Championship, the first ever title for a turbocharged engine. He sealed it at Kyalami on October 15, 1983. The M10 had evolved from a modest family car power plant into a world-beating racing machine. The roar that echoed across that season was not just the sound of victory. It was the echo of von Falkenhausen's original idea, proving that great engineering can transcend time and purpose. The M12/13 became a legend in its own right, but its soul was pure M10. Its compactness, its strength, and its willingness to adapt were all inherited traits. What began as an act of corporate survival had become one of the greatest engineering success stories in motorsport history. When the turbo era of Formula One ended, so did the M10's reign on the track. Yet its legacy endured in every BMW engine that followed. It had shown the world that precision, not size, was what made power possible. It was proof that perfection does not always arrive fully formed. Sometimes it begins quietly, under the hood of a modest sedan waiting for history to catch up. By the end of the 1970s, the M10 had already achieved what few engines ever could. It had saved a company, won championships, and proven itself adaptable to nearly any challenge. Yet it was not finished. As new environmental regulations and fuel economy standards emerged across Europe and North America, BMW faced the question of how to modernize an engine that was already more than 20 years old without losing the character that had made it legendary. The answer came through careful evolution rather than reinvention. Carburetors, once the standard for every version of the M10, began to disappear. In their place came fuel injection systems developed with Bosch. The first step was the charismatic system, a mechanical continuous injection design that arrived in the mid-1970s on models such as the 320i. Later versions adopted the hinged electronic system, which used sensors to meter fuel with new precision. These changes made the M10 smoother, more efficient, and significantly cleaner. As BMW moved toward the mid-1980s, newer engines began integrating Bosch Motronic control that combined fuel and ignition management, continuing the refinement that the M10 had started. These refinements allowed the M10 to survive into a new generation of BMWs. It powered the first 3 Series, the E21, and later appeared in the early E30 models during the 1980s. Under their hoods, it became quieter and more civilized, but it never lost its crisp mechanical heartbeat. The same forged crankshaft, the same robust block, and the same sense of balance remained. Production techniques improved as well. New casting methods reduced impurities in the iron, while tighter machining tolerances gave the engines longer life and smoother operation. Owners who had grown up with the earlier carbureted 2002s were surprised at how refined the newer versions felt. They idled evenly, started instantly in cold weather, and required far less maintenance. Yet when the throttle opened wide, the old spirit was still there. Between 1962 and 1988, more than 3.5 million M10 engines were built. Few designs in automotive history have lasted that long without a full redesign. Its combination of reliability, efficiency, and character made it one of the longest-lived 4-cylinders ever produced. The cars it powered evolved, but the essence of the engine remained constant. By the time the final M10 left the Munich production line, it had served faithfully for 26 years. It had carried BMW through prosperity and crisis, through regulation and revolution, and through an entire era of technological change. In a world that was becoming increasingly digital, the M10's spirit continued through its successors, like the M40 and M43, which borrowed its geometry and design philosophy. It was a machine that represented continuity in an industry obsessed with reinvention. Even the best engineering carries imperfections, and the M10 was no exception. Its strengths were legendary, but its quirks became part of its personality. Owners who loved the engine often spoke about it with equal measures of admiration and frustration. The most common issue was carburation, especially in the early models. Twin carburetor setups could deliver strong performance when perfectly tuned, but maintaining that balance required skill. A small change in altitude or temperature could throw the mixture off, causing rough idling or loss of power. Mechanics learned to keep spare jets and gaskets on hand because the M10 demanded constant attention to detail. It was not unreliable, just precise. It wanted to be understood. Timing chain stretch was another characteristic complaint. The long chain that connected the crankshaft to the camshaft could wear over time, creating a soft metallic chatter that experienced ears could identify instantly. It rarely caused failure, but it served as a reminder that the engine was mechanical in the purest sense, alive with sound and motion. Many owners came to find that noise comforting, a sign that the engine was still breathing and working as intended. Oil leaks appeared as the miles piled up. The valve cover gaskets and front seals would often weep, leaving faint stains beneath the car. For most owners, it was a minor nuisance rather than a serious problem. The M10 seemed to accept that a little oil loss was the cost of a long life. Later, fuel-injected versions introduced their own set of frustrations. As electronics replaced carburetors, new problems emerged. Vacuum lines cracked with age, sensors failed, and electrical connectors corroded. The once simple 4-cylinder gained complexity, and with it came the occasional mystery idle or stubborn start. Still, even with those issues, the M10 was easier to diagnose and repair than most of its contemporaries. The greatest limitation was not mechanical, but generational. By the 1980s, multi-valve engines from Japan and Europe were raising expectations for power and efficiency. The M10's single overhead cam and two-valve layout, brilliant in 1962, began to look dated. BMW engineers could only stretch the design so far before physics imposed its limits. Higher compression brought diminishing returns, and the narrow valve angles restricted further breathing improvements. Yet even as technology moved forward, respect for the M10 never faded. It had done everything asked of it and more. It powered everyday sedans, iconic coupes, and world championship race cars. It survived long enough to see its grandchildren born in the form of newer BMW engines that borrowed its dimensions and design philosophy. The M10's shortcomings did not tarnish its legend. They made it human. It was an engine that worked best with care and understanding, one that responded to patience rather than force. Those who mastered it discovered that its simplicity was its greatest strength. Every weakness could be repaired, every flaw overcome with skill. In an era when technology was beginning to distance drivers from their machines, the M10 remained a direct connection between human and metal. When production of the M10 finally ended in 1988, it left behind one of the richest legacies in automotive history. Few engines had served so many roles, in so many forms, for so long. It had started as an act of survival and ended as a monument to what careful design and persistence could achieve. The M10's descendants carried its DNA well into the modern age. The M40 that followed preserved its core geometry and bore spacing, along with several design principles that kept the same smooth, balanced character. The latter, M43, refined those ideas in the 1990s with updated materials and electronics, but still reflected the same focus on reliability and mechanical harmony. Every modern BMW four-cylinder owes something to the M10's design philosophy. Its influence went far beyond the assembly line. The M10 became a template for tuners, racers, and engineers who valued engines that could be trusted at the limit. Enthusiasts discovered that the same block that powered a family sedan could handle turbocharging, supercharging, or high-compression racing setups without complaint. In garages around the world, builders still choose the M10 because it combines mechanical simplicity with a rare kind of resilience. The engine's most famous descendant arrived in 1986 with the debut of the E30 M3. Under its hood sat the S14, an evolution of the M10 block mated to a twin-cam 16-valve head. It produced nearly 200 horsepower from just 2.3 liters and powered one of the most celebrated touring cars ever built. The S14 carried the M10's genes into the modern era, connecting the earliest Neue Klasse cars to the precision machines of BMW's M division. Without the M10, there would have been no M3, no racing heritage, and no foundation for BMW's later success in performance engineering. Even decades after its retirement, the M10 continues to live in workshops and on racetracks. Restorers rebuild them for vintage BMW, racers still push them to 9,000 revolutions, and collectors prize them for their smooth, tactile response. They are engines that feel alive, communicating through vibration and sound rather than digital displays. Each mechanical pulse is a reminder of a time when performance was built through craftsmanship instead of software. What makes the M10 truly special is that it transcended its purpose. It was not just a component in a car, but a cornerstone in BMW's identity. It taught the company how to balance efficiency and emotion, how to create engines that inspired loyalty, and how to turn mechanical precision into character. It proved that a modest four-cylinder could become a legend through sheer endurance and thoughtful design. Baron Alex von Falkenhausen never intended to create an icon. He wanted to give BMW a future, and in doing so, he gave it a soul. The M10 carried the company through crisis and into greatness, linking generations of engineers, racers, and drivers through a shared belief that excellence comes from refinement, not excess. More than 60 years later, the M10's story still defines what BMW stands for. It represents a perfect balance between practicality and passion, between discipline and daring. It is proof that a single engine can carry the weight of a brand's destiny and come out stronger for it. The BMW M10 began as a survival plan and ended as a legend. It powered family sedans, race cars, and even a world champion, carrying BMW from crisis to greatness with nothing more than honest engineering. For over 20 years, it stood as proof that progress does not require perfection, only persistence. Even now, its sound lives on. Crisp, mechanical, and unmistakably BMW. The M10 was more than an engine. It was a heartbeat forged in iron and patience, the rhythm of a company finding its way back to life.